Our subsequent speaker is going to be Janika Päll. Janika is professor of classical philology and head of the Department of Classical Philology at this university. She studies archaic Greek poetry, Greek and Latin syntax and stylistics. And today, Janika is going to talk about the Abyssos in Greek antiquity. So, Janika, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. So, I have restricted my topic a little bit because it would be too much to go through all the theological writings, but I'm certainly going to stop on one of these, and especially on the role of translators in our history of Abyss, and which starts with the Septuagint. And in my examples, I'm going to oscillate between the literal and figurative senses of this word, and also Abyss as a quality and as a substance, and also how the human perspectives comes into our usage of this word, and where the transcendental comes into the play. And I have worked mostly in case of Greek or the Thesaurus Linguae Graecae, and for Latin, of course, we have the Thesaurus Linguae Latina, which work continues already for the second 100 of years, and we are already by the R letters, so it's good for Abyssos. It's there. And we have discussed, etymology has been discussed a lot, but I must say that the etymology, Greek etymology of Abyssos is still unclear. And the modern etymological dictionaries mainly are based on Schwitzer's article from the 1920s, and bring together this bythos or byssos, bottom, the sea, but also death, and connect it to all different roots, meaning deep, bathus, or even bythmein, bottom, or even going till bapto, depend or baptize. And of course, the composite term Abyssos is derived from this root byssos. And as I told, Schwitzer has connected it also to the word besa, wooden comb, especially in the mountains, and found some Vedic parallels. At first, when we start with Greek literature, we start with Homer, and we don't find Abyssos in Homer, but we find byssos both in the literal and figurative meaning, either dipping into the deep, or depths, as byssos, as byson, or pondering things in the deep of one's heart, in the compositum bysodomeuon, which was description for Odysseus. But already from the 5th century on, in Herodotus, we found this composite adjective abyssos with privative alpha, describing bottomless sources, mainly sources, and lakes, both are feminine, pegai, limnai, but also, and this is already on the verge of figurative, in case of Euripides, the yawning abyss of Tartarus, or hell. So we already in the 5th century, we come to all different possibilities which we see later in the usage of this word, but great stress on water. And we also see in the first examples, and there are altogether 8 of them before the Septuagint, the human point of view on the nature, on the outside, from above, so downward verticality, and it is not a substantive. So it's a distinctive quality of some objects or phenomena, but it's not yet the substantive itself. It hasn't been materialized as an entity yet. And figuratively also we find Abyssos, but more broadly for the wealth, which in Greek mythology is of course below the earth, but also the rivers. We have the rivers of distress or art, which has all these different meanings of ill and bad fate and dire stress. And also we have, in case of Aeschylus, the suppliants, the divine aspect, the sight of Zeus, which is unfathomable, which you can't, a human person cannot penetrate. So we have all these metaphors of watery bodies, plus the earth. We have the contemplation and looking, the human side, and we have the godliness and unpenetrability. So, in both senses, we have actually a vast set of examples in TLJ, more than 3,000, but before the Septuagint, as I told, only 8. And also after the Septuagint, in pagan authors, the word is quite rare. But keeping these both senses, plus the Christian literature. And now I need to go to Genesis, and as Urmas told us, it has been mainly used for translating Tohum, primordial deep, but not only. It's not one-to-one correspondence. There are cases of Tohum which are not translated of Abyssos, and Abyssos is equivalent for different kinds of notions. So it's a mess, and I'm trying to leave it aside as much as I can. But we, of course, why the translators chose this word and not chaos, this primordial matter. The explanation has been sought in parallels for Babylonian literature, and especially with the god of the fresh water, who is male, Apsu, and he's mating with the salt water ocean goddess Tiamat. But it's difficult because when Abyssos is Tiamat and the she-god, and at the same time when Apsu is Abyssos and the he-god, then we have some very complicated transgender issue which I don't want to solve. But the parallel of this in this cosmogony is, and it was clear for the Greeks. More known is the parallel brought by Damascius, the Neoplatonic philosopher from 5th, 6th century BC, but actually Damascius is citing Eudemos, who was working already in the 4th century BC. So he brought this Taute as Tiamat and Apophon as Apsu together, and as a parallel for Greek cosmogony. And of course we see it in case of Hesiod's theogony, the chaos which gave birth to earth, and earth which bore starry heaven and all other things. And here we see the difference between Greek cosmogony and the Hebrew one. There is this important place for the earth in it, but also the chaos, which is this deep. So how we proceed with this? At first, Abyss is this primordial deep in the Genesis, and there are waters, altogether 50 examples, and it's a feminine noun. Now, Septuagint is the first usage of this Abyssos as a noun. Then there are many other examples. I just put here my tools of work, which are perfect for biblical studies, of course. But it shouldn't always be connected to the waters. It can also be the Tahom translated. It's not an exact translation, but the translation can include earth, in case of Genesis 49. And Abyssos can also be used for another word which is translated as deep as well, Tsula, and connected to the idea of Tartarus, the world below. And also there are other notions like a broad blaze in Job. I think Urmas can connect better. And it's not always in singular as this primordial deep, but also the waters, the sources of waters, it can be, and just the deep places, it can occur in plural in very many different places. And of course, we can also find the figurative meaning, Abyssos, as the depths of the soul, which is most eminent in case of Psalm, and also most influential in later Greek spiritual literature. And we found it also in pseudo-epigraphic writings. And again, the connections with water and the depths of one's heart are there. In the New Testament, we have two important meanings of Hades, Abyssos. At first, the Hades, underworld, which we already actually see in case of these ancient Greek adjectives connected to Tartarus. So the Christ needs to be, he's descended down, has descended down. It's a need to bring him back from the dead. And of course, we had this other very influential usage of Abyssos in the New Testament, which is in the Apocalypse of John, which has been already quoted yesterday. And we saw the fifth angel sounded, and a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit. So this meaning is here as well. So, in Latin tradition, I'm wrapping up my paper, and I'm not going to step much of it. I don't know whether you caught it from my first slide about Latin tradition, showing this Thesaurus Linguae Latina entry. It occurs, the word occurs in Latin only in Christian contexts. So it does mean that it comes from the Bible. We don't have any examples for this before, and it is a direct loan from Greek. So we don't have a sort of life before the translations, and we have the translation of Vulgate by Jerome. Well, there is this issue of the discussions of St. Augustine and St. Jerome about whether to translate from the Hebrew Bible or use the Septuagint. And it's not my field of research, but in case of Abyssos, we can't leave aside the impact of Septuagint still. And of course, in the whole Latin tradition, it occurs both in the direct sense, so as immense space, then also as immense space of the sea in the Bible. So the Abyssos to whom the Bible, and then immense space on the land. So we have all kinds of aspects, but we could also say that, as in Greek cases, the stress on waters is perhaps a little bit greater. And we have figurative meanings, the most of all, the deepness of the human soul is to be considered either contemplating or desiring something. In both cases, the Abyssos comes into the place. And there are other meanings also going to the immense quantities and some other special cases. So I can't go to much more places. I need to leave aside all aspects of Abyssos in magical texts and mystical texts, which are also important and which actually take away this vertical dimension and go more into the space of just immeasurability. But it would have been too much. So I resume my paper telling that in the case of Abyssos, in direct and figurative senses, translation process has been, which has given the matter or brought this notion before as a substance, as something substantive in its own right. And we have to be thankful to the translators, 70 or 72, and the founder of this whole project, and of course the St. Jerome for all of it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Janika, for the talk, which presented us with very rich material and a survey on a very wide field, actually. So the space is open for questions right now. Yes, please, just a second. I bring you the mic.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. So I was wondering about the chaos. So you had a quotation there, and there was a sentence that chaos came to be, right? So I was just wondering, where did it come from? And in Greek tradition, is chaos somehow characterized, or how is it characterized? I mean, which adjectives are used describing chaos? Or is there just this word chaos and it is in no way qualified? And also, in later tradition, when the word abyss came to use, was it sometimes used to refer to this original chaos, or wasn't it the case?
There are. I was wondering, And I can't remember exactly. I went through, did a combined search on chaos and Abyssos. And one of these results was this Damasios or Eudemos example. There's indeed not much of them, but which is sort of strange, because we think of this creation myth, and it seems so elementary to bring these two things together. But the other notion which is connected, and which we can also find in the case of this Hesiodic example, is Tartarus, the world below, which is connected both to chaos and to Abyssos. So it's chaos and Abyssos, they don't meet much in the basis of text, but they have the same connotations, shared connotations. And your first question was about. Where did the chaos come from? But Hesiod doesn't tell. Hesiod doesn't tell it, but he uses indeed the verb geneto, came into being. So it just comes. But the chaos, if we, I didn't mention the explanations of Greek etymologies, but it has been described. If we think, yesterday it was a lot of talk about void, and chaos has been described as an empty place between the land and the sky, and which should be interesting for you as a philosopher, with no boundaries. So this aperantos and aperon come into play with this, but it's not directly connected to Abyssos so much. Mm. These are, it seems that there are two patterns of thinking, and Abyssos it's more theological, and it addresses the transcendent more than the physical world, perhaps, after the Septuagint.
Well, I think that the question, where does the chaos come from? It's easy to be answered, coming from us, from our minds and hearts, and it's the probably most existential experience of mankind. But I had one question too, because, maybe it's a twofold question. At one time you presented us with a quote, I think, from Aeschylus, where we see two kinds of abysses. One is the watery one, we mentioned already frequently, and the other one was the earthly one, which is there is an immeasurable wealth of earth below beneath our corpses. And my question here is that how can you describe different qualities of these two-foldedness of abysses, or is it a very isolated quote which cannot be so much explained and interpreted further?
I would say that in case of everything before Septuagint, you can't squeeze out of 8 examples too much. And this is, here it's an isolated example, but if we take the later examples as well, then the connection to earth, I don't know how much there is already the influence of the Judeo-Christian tradition in it, but the connotation of health is very much present. So I think it's more, perhaps, the importance that it is boundless health than that it is below the earth. Mm. If you understand what I mean, it seems to be more important, the focus on health, wealth, than the earth. But it doesn't go away. There are single examples in a case of earth, and of course there was this possible explanation of etymology with besa, the thicket, and woody glen, where the water is not necessarily present. It can be present, but not necessarily. And we can find the such examples as well.
Mm-hmm. 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 Well, there is space. Yes. Okay. Who was first? It's yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I would only like to make some brief comments on the question of Septuagint and Abyssos there. The Septuagint translation was made first in the 3rd and 2nd centuries and 1st centuries BC. And this is already the time when the context has changed, if to compare to the writings of the Hebrew Bible. So it's some centuries later, and there are two movements to my mind which should be mentioned. One is that the translators of the Septuagint, to my mind, try to diminish the possibility of divine connotations in the text. So they are in a way better monotheists than the writers of the Hebrew Bible were. At least in the book of Job, there are many examples where it's clearly they try to diminish the polytheistic possibility of interpretation. And the second thing is that the translation of the Septuagint was done already then when, as you noticed in the examples I gave from the Qumran writings or apocalyptic writings, it's a time when abyss becomes parallel or synonymous with Sheol or netherworld, or the world where the dead people are, or in the apocalyptic literature the wicked people are. So it means that we should think about the possibility that in the Septuagint the word for abyss is already losing this watery connotation. It's more perhaps going to the direction of Sheol or the netherworld.
I cannot agree, because I went through the examples. There is too much water in order to claim that it's losing the watery connotations. But what you told about this gaining the meaning of the netherworld, you see it later in the New Testament and I also gave the examples, but the possibility is there in this connection to Tartaros in case of early Greek examples. But you are right, it becomes strengthened, this meaning. It gains more focus. So thanks for focusing on it.
Yeah, like in the 2nd century Qumran writings, where Sheol is clearly parallel to abyss. So.
Okay.
Can I just say one word?
Yes.
Yes, listen, thank you very much for the speech. And I personally was very, very happy to get the examples from Herodotus. Because there, I think you really do reestablish where you force us out of this either physical or spiritual, internal or geographical, linguistic, conceptual, philological, or scientific thing. It's Herodotus is an explorer. He's an explorer of cultures, but he's also an explorer of towns. So he's really interested in water for the usual reasons that we can't have a town without water. We either have a delta, or we have a river, or we have groundwater, and that the importance of those sources seems to me very interesting. We're not in the sea, as far as I can see, although Herodotus will be interested in the sea, we'll be interested in fresh drinking water. So we're interested in really, I think we should make a distinction there. We're talking about 3% of the water of the world, not the other waters. So maybe in terms of the good and the bad, that would be interesting to consider that. Just to rebound on what someone said about where does chaos come from, and another colleague very amusingly said it comes from us. Yes, but in one sense, what's us? Us will be the human heart. And what is the whole human heart? This is the spiritual space, godlike space for most religions. So I think, this idea of origin is going to be problematic. It's certainly problematic if you go to sign language. When people translate sign languages, they always say, okay, well, Jesus comes down from, he descends from, he comes from. Where? From where? They need to physically situate this in space, and they have not a much more simple, but the physical level is really important there. I think you really established that with the Herodotus examples, that physical, inextricably physical nature of this space that is not a space, that takes us beyond space. That seems to me very essential in your speech. Thank you.
Thank you.
Time hasn't yet run out. Okay, I put one question, which I forgot previously. Just simply, being aware of this strong impact on watery imagery, on this concept and the way how Abyss is pictured in the text you presented us with. My question is whether you also found some evidence of this abyss as a space for purification, not only a space for punishment or for extinction of something, but for purification, as we have it also in other cultural. Yeah.
There is this all part of the Christian religious literature, which I left aside. I would say you can find everything there, which we discussed yesterday. You can find the soul, the purity of the soul, the worst qualities of the soul, the aspiration towards God. But I wouldn't say aspiration towards the hell so much, but I think you can find, but I need to work more on in order to. I am not able to give you exactly examples.
Well, your answer sounds as if you have the feeling that it all comes later. At later stages,
yes, in the mystic writers.
Yeah, the mysticism, writers. Right. So
yes.
Medieval literature.
Yes, in the mystical writings, I'd say you need to go look for this there, not before.
Yeah.
But of course, everything which starts with Psalms is ambiguous, because I think the Psalms already give you this possibility of going in all directions with this poetic openness of reflection on human heart. But it is also the mystical writers, they were inspired by the Psalms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. So okay. Thank you very much for this. Yeah, thank you.